These beloved child actors weren't orphans from humble beginnings. They were secretly adopted from notorious crime families, and their real parents were some of America's most dangerous criminals, who sold them to Hollywood for the right price. The boy wonder who erased his grandfather, the butcher of Brooklyn. Jackie Cooper was the child of plucky American boyhood and seemed destined for the purest forms of fame and success. What audiences didn't know, however, was that the Cooper name was actually the carefully constructed shield protecting him from one of the most brutal underworld figures in New York City, his biological grandfather, Frank the Butcher Castellano. Castellano was a key figure in the early Brooklyn rackets, overseeing illegal gambling, extortion, and his chilling efficiency in eliminating competitors earned him his nickname. Jackie's biological mother, Angelina, Castellano's youngest daughter, became pregnant out of wedlock, and the shame and danger became too immense. The baby, who would become the famous Jackie, was seen by Castellano as both a liability and a chance for a bizarre form of legitimate legacy. The deal was brokered by a notorious studio fixer from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in 1928. For a substantial sum and a guarantee of absolute silence and distance, Angelina relinquished the child to a trusted Hollywood family. The fee was rumored to be $10,000, an astronomical sum for the era, equivalent to over $180,000 today, paid directly into Castellano's accounts. This payment ensured the child would never be able to claim a connection to the mob family's ill-gotten gains. The adoption was meticulously managed, with all records sealed and a new birth certificate fabricated. The name Cooper was chosen to ensure a complete lack of criminal association. As Jackie Cooper's star rose, so did the danger. But the fixer had been ruthlessly efficient. Castellano was warned that any attempt to approach the boy would result in the public revelation of his own crimes and the destruction of the boy's career. Young Jackie grew up with an intense, unexplained anxiety. He described his childhood as feeling like he was perpetually performing for the approval of unseen forces. His famous tears on screen were often genuine, stemming from the intense pressure he felt. He never truly learned the truth until he was well into his middle years, decades after Castellano was a struggle over territory. By then, Jackie was able to view his past not as a source of shame, but as the harrowing price paid for his life, a life that allowed him to escape the violent destiny that had claimed his grandfather. The cost of his stardom was the complete erasure of his first family, replaced by a fictional history that shone brightly on the silver screen. The terror of his true lineage was simply the foundation upon which his fame was built. The price of silence sometimes required outright purchase, but other times, the cost was the invention of a terrifying lie. The child starlet whose real father was hiding in plain sight. The kidnapping myth. Margaret O'Brien, the immensely talented child actress famous for her emotionally resonant performances in films like Meet Me in St. Louis, was the very image of sweet, precocious innocence. Her early life story, as presented by the studio, was one of genteel, if modest, circumstances. What the public didn't know was that Margaret's biological father, Patrick "Pat" Delaney, was a mid-level enforcer for a powerful Irish-American crime family based in Boston. And the family name was considered toxic. Delaney was not a famous bank robber, but rather a man deeply involved in loan sharking, protection rackets, and moving illegal goods. When Margaret's mother, Gladys, decided she wanted a better life for her daughter, the price of freedom was high, and the logistics were a nightmare.
Delaney, while willing to give up the child for a substantial lump sum, rumored to be $15,000, was also paranoid about Gladys revealing his secrets. The studio needed a story to explain why Maxine Delaney vanished, and Margaret O'Brien appeared. They settled on a narrative that was cruel in its invention: the kidnapping myth. When Margaret was barely 4 years old, the studio's fixer staged a terrifying, short-lived disappearance. The story leaked to a friendly journalist. Little Maxine had been briefly seized by unidentified thugs and then miraculously rescued. The event was deeply traumatic for the child, but it served the studio's purpose perfectly. It provided a dramatic yet forgivable reason for Gladys to flee Boston, change their names, and seek safety in the anonymity of Hollywood. The story provided cover for the name change, the relocation, and the star's intensely guarded nature in later life. Margaret O'Brien carried the residual fear of that staged event for years. She grew up believing she was constantly in danger, that the thugs might return. This perpetual state of low-grade anxiety contributed to her remarkable ability to convey intense, genuine distress on screen. Her tears were the result of a terror that had been carefully engineered by the very people who were supposed to protect her. The public, believing her story, celebrated her resilience. In reality, her career was the direct result of a calculated lie and a deep familial secret. Her father, Delaney, later experienced a fatal event during a failed operation and was out of the picture. But Margaret's childhood was shaped by the perpetual feeling that her real identity and the danger associated with it was always lurking just outside the studio gates. This secret fostered a unique resilience in Margaret, who channeled her anxieties into her powerful performances. By the time she became an adult, she had perfected the art of compartmentalization, the very trait necessary to survive the knowledge that her own fame was a shield purchased with blood money and a traumatic fabrication. The need to maintain an utterly immaculate public conduct was born from the fear that her real father might somehow manifest in her life. The price of silence sometimes required outright purchase, but other times the cost was the invention of a terrifying lie. The little rascal purchased from a Prohibition-era gangster's mistress. The currency of the Golden Age was silence, and few knew its value better than the fixer who secured the identity of Spanky McFarland. The image of Spanky, the roly-poly leader of the Our Gang comedies, represented a Depression-era ideal of carefree boyhood, yet its foundation lay in one of the most sordid transactions of the late Prohibition era. Spanky's biological mother, Doris, was the longtime mistress of Salvatore "Sal" Moretti, a brutal gangster with ties to illegal alcohol distribution and violent activities. Moretti saw the child as a liability, and his decision was swift and final. The child was to be removed quietly. Doris, harboring a deep maternal instinct, reached out to a discreet adoption agency rumored to have ties to Hollywood studios. A studio fixer arranged a one-time payout of $25,000, an enormous sum designed to guarantee silence and allow Doris to vanish completely. Moretti signed off on the exchange. The transaction took place in 1931, and the child was immediately renamed George and given a pristine backstory in Texas, far from the shadow of Moretti's influence. The emotional weight of this secret rested heavily on Spanky's adoptive parents, who lived in perpetual fear of a subpoena. Spanky grew up with a deep, unexplained feeling of abandonment, which he channeled into a fiercely loyal and protective on-screen persona. He later recounted feelings of being perpetually on the road to somewhere else, a subconscious echo of the drastic relocation undertaken to save him. As an adult, his attempts to locate Doris failed. The fixer had sealed the records permanently. The most poignant aspect of this story is that Spanky, throughout his life, embodied the very innocence his biological family had forfeited. The irony is that the little rascal of the silver screen was a purchased orphan, saved from a terrifying fate by the same system that exploited his talents. His early fame became a powerful, necessary barrier against the dark, illicit world of his birth. The stakes grow higher when the star isn't purchased from a mistress, but from the inner circle of organized crime itself. The teen heartthrob and the secret daughter of the five families. Gloria Jean, the beautiful teenage singer, was marketed as the sweet, pure voice of a new generation. This public persona was shattered for a select few who knew the terrifying truth. Gloria Jean was biologically the secret daughter of Vito the Enforcer, Genovese, a future leader of one of New York's notorious five families. Genovese had a consequential affair, and when the singer became pregnant, he could not afford the public scandal tied directly to his escalating power structure. The arrangement made in 1935 was not a simple payout. It was a complex series of favors, extending protection to Universal Pictures in exchange for the absolute disappearance of baby Anna. The child was adopted by a loyal studio family and renamed Gloria Jean. The secret was so volatile that Gloria Jean's adoptive parents were forced to sign contracts that included a non-disclosure and relocation clause, meaning they could be moved anywhere at the studio's expense should Genovese's circumstances change. Gloria Jean grew up believing she was adopted from a wealthy, respectable family. The truth, that her origins were tied to the most feared organization in the United States, was a time bomb. She experienced intense emotional isolation, often questioning why her adoptive parents were so visibly terrified whenever an unsolicited car drove past their home. The situation was particularly dangerous because Genovese was known to employ methods of violence and intimidation. A retired studio lawyer quietly revealed the truth to Gloria Jean after Genovese passed away in the 1960s. The revelation triggered a profound identity crisis. She realized her entire career was predicated on a perilous bargain. However, her resilience shone through. She channeled her grief and newfound understanding into her personal life, quietly working with charitable organizations and avoiding the very studio system that had both saved and enslaved her. She had been purchased by the glamour of Hollywood to escape the blood and intimidation of the five families. Her art became her salvation, an identity she had earned. These early revelations are just the beginning of the underworld's hold on Hollywood. If you want to continue this journey through Tinseltown's darkest bargains, we bring you the full, complicated humanity of these iconic figures every week. Click that subscribe button now so you don't miss the secrets yet to come. Now, let us look at the darkest side of the adoption process itself, the wholesome ingenue and the black market baby broker in Hollywood. Sometimes the scandal was not just the father, but the terrifying system that facilitated the transfer of the children. Jane Withers, the spunky, irrepressible child star who often played the mischievous foil to Shirley Temple, was the epitome of wholesome energy. Yet her arrival in the Hollywood system was facilitated by a notorious, deeply illegal figure known only as the broker. This was not an adoption agency. It was a black market operation in the 1930s that connected the desperate, often crime families seeking to eliminate liabilities, with the powerful. Studios and wealthy stars seeking clean children. The broker's methods
were ruthless, utilizing a network of corrupt doctors, lawyers, and petty criminals. Jane's biological mother, a relative of a Chicago outfit associate involved in the illegal distribution of alcohol, became pregnant by a man who was already married and deeply connected to the outfit's leadership. The father was known for his ruthlessness in his professional and personal life. The baby, Sarah, was a liability that could shatter the fragile peace within the outfit's hierarchy. The decision was made to sell the child to the black market broker, who guaranteed the outfit permanent disappearance and absolute secrecy. The price was not just cash, but a series of favors related to controlling union activity on film sets, a common and highly valuable currency for the studios at the time.
Jane Withers was one of the broker's most successful sales. She was deemed high potential due to her physical appearance and was immediately placed with a family willing to sign away their autonomy to the studio. What the Withers family didn't know was that they were constantly being watched, not by a social worker, but by former associates of the broker, ensuring compliance. Jane's relentless energy and drive, which made her a star, was perhaps a reaction to a childhood lived in an atmosphere of intense, unspoken tension. She felt the constant pressure to perform, to be perfect, because she subconsciously understood the fragility of her adopted identity. When Jane learned the truth much later in life, the revelation was devastating. It wasn't just that her birth family was criminal, it was that she was a commodity, passed from the hand of the mob to the hand of a black market fixer. The shame of being a black market baby haunted her, a secret she carried with immense personal burden. However, her life became a quiet act of defiance against her origins. Her resilience transformed the horrific transaction of her birth into a lifetime of efforts to help children, proving that even a purchased commodity could choose a life of immense moral value, defying the label of commodity imposed upon her. The Golden Boy singer adopted to silence a high-profile jury tampering scandal. The nexus of crime in Hollywood meant that sometimes a child was used as a literal human instrument of silence in political battles. Jimmy Lydon, the handsome juvenile actor, projected clean-cut American values. Yet his adoption was the direct result of a scandal that nearly toppled the entire political machine of a major Midwest city. Jimmy's biological father, Walter "Wally" Vance, a powerful union boss, was deeply involved in a massive 1942 jury tampering scheme. Vance was caught and faced a long sentence, which would force him to reveal the names of his superiors. The political machine was desperate. To prevent Vance from talking, a lawyer with ties to Paramount Studios brokered a brilliant and cruel solution: the adoption of Vance's 3-year-old son, Patrick, by a studio-approved family. The boy was renamed Jimmy and whisked to Hollywood. The deal was an exchange. Vance received a reduced sentence and an untraceable trust fund. The studio received a child actor and, more importantly, Vance's absolute silence regarding the scandal. The child became the ultimate form of life insurance and leverage against the disgraced enforcer. Jimmy Lydon, or Patrick Vance, grew up feeling like he was owned, like a piece of studio property, a subconscious manifestation of the fact that his entire existence was a political payoff. He never understood why his adoptive parents seemed so unnaturally loyal to the studio. The truth only emerged after Vance's passing, revealing that Jimmy's career was not based on talent alone, but on a deal made in a back room to protect corrupt politicians and criminals. His fame was the consequence of a criminal silence. This knowledge profoundly affected his later career, leading him to take on complex, darker roles, as if seeking to acknowledge the shadows of his past. He spent the rest of his life ensuring his own integrity was unimpeachable, defying the political corruption that was his birthright. The Western hero, whose birth was tied to the Texas oil fraud of the 1930s. The criminal underbelly was not limited to the cities. The sprawling oil fields of Texas also provided their share of secrets for Hollywood to purchase. Richard Jekyll, known for his rugged, dependable roles in westerns and war films throughout the 1940s and 50s, projected an image of solid, no-nonsense American authenticity. The truth was far more complicated, rooted in one of the largest Texas oil fraud schemes of the Great Depression. Richard's biological father, Clyde "the Gusher" Thompson, was a brilliant but ruthless geologist who was part of a ring that sold fraudulent oil leases and salted dry wells across Texas, defrauding thousands of small investors and corporations. When the scheme collapsed in 1934, Thompson faced severe charges and the very real threat of personal harm from the victims. Thompson needed to disappear entirely, and he needed a way to liquidate his hidden assets untraceably. His infant son, Sammy, became the perfect vehicle. A prominent Los Angeles lawyer, whose family was one of the victims of Thompson's fraud, agreed to broker the adoption of Sammy to a trusted, connected studio family. The lawyer's motive was complex: revenge on Thompson by seizing his child, and the need to secretly convert a portion of Thompson's illicit assets into a tangible, non-traceable fee. The adoption was financed by money derived directly from the oil fraud, effectively washing the money through the body of the child. Sammy was renamed Richard, and his papers were scrubbed clean. Richard Jekyll's life became an exercise in rugged self-reliance, mirroring the survivalist ethos of the westerns he became famous for. He possessed a quiet intensity, perhaps reflecting the constant fear and desperation that surrounded his birth. He later admitted to always feeling like an outsider, like he didn't belong in the glamorous world of film, a feeling that stemmed from the deep insecurity of his purchased identity. He later learned that his father, Thompson, had suffered a severe misfortune after his discovery in hiding, only a few years after the adoption. But the shadow of the fraud remained. The emotional consequence was profound. When Richard finally learned the details of the oil scheme, he became obsessed with fairness and financial transparency, a direct reaction to the avarice that was his biological family's trademark. He refused to participate in endorsement deals he deemed dishonest, and lived a remarkably frugal life despite his success, as if trying to atone for the massive financial crime that had paid for his childhood. His screen persona, the stoic hero, was his greatest performance, a carefully maintained facade of honesty built upon a foundation of Texas deceit. The starlet who was the granddaughter of a notorious East Coast bank robber. The Golden Age was defined by its ability to take the seed of trauma and transform it into a fragile flower of glamour. Anne Blythe, the elegant, sophisticated star of films like Mildred Pierce and The King and I, had an image that exuded aristocratic poise and theatrical grace. There was nothing in her public life to suggest a connection to violent crime, but her background was arguably the most famous and perilous of all. She was the granddaughter of Frank the Vault Callahan, one of the East Coast's most notorious bank robbers of the 1920s. Callahan was famous for his meticulous planning and the massive sums he stole, making him a perpetual target of J. Edgar Hoover's nascent Federal Bureau of Investigation. When Blythe's mother, Evelyn, was born, the family was constantly on the run. When Evelyn gave birth to her own daughter, Nancy, in 1928, she recognized the terrifying reality. The child would never have a stable life and would always be a target of law enforcement simply by association. Evelyn made the desperate decision to use her connections to the entertainment world to secure a new identity for Nancy. A family friend with ties to Warner Brothers arranged the adoption. Evelyn, who was terrified, refused to take any money. She only wanted absolute, guaranteed disappearance. The adoption was handled with extreme secrecy by the studio, which saw the child's aristocratic features as perfect for the roles they envisioned. Nancy was renamed Anne, and her official birthplace was moved to a location with destroyed records. The studio meticulously crafted a clean, middle-class backstory. Anne Blythe was raised in an atmosphere of intense discipline and secrecy, always warned to never discuss family business. This fostered her on-screen sophistication, a guarded elegance that hid a lifetime of quiet paranoia. The weight of this
Lineage was immense.
Even though Frank Callahan, the fear of the FBI, knocking on the door, or a reporter exposing the connection never left Anne's mind. She later admitted that every role she played was a form of escapism, a chance to fully inhabit a life that was stable and secure, unlike the life of her birth. Her sophistication, her grace, and her reserved demeanor were all part of the defense mechanism she developed to protect the fragile lie of her identity. Before we continue our dark journey, we want to know, what other Golden Age Hollywood topic would you like us to cover in a future video? The early days of television, the studio contract wars, or perhaps the dark history of screen testing? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us which of these revelations about crime and adoption surprised you the most. Now, back to the secrets. The freckle-faced star who carried the name of a major bootlegging operation. The public saw a playful, all-American youth. The truth was far more industrial and dangerous. Roddy McDowall, the British-born child star known for his warm smile and relatable innocence in films like How Green Was My Valley, was one of the most beloved juveniles of the 1940s. What was obscured was the desperate need to escape a criminal connection so public that it threatened his future before it even began. Roddy's biological father, William Whiskey Bill O'Malley, was a central figure in a major bootlegging and illegal alcohol importation operation in the late 1920s, a scheme that spanned the Atlantic and involved high-level corruption on both sides. O'Malley's operation was so large and so notorious that the family name, O'Malley, carried the scent of scandal and illegality. When his son, Roderick, was born in 1928, O'Malley had already begun to fear the inevitable collapse of his business. He realized the child needed a completely new, untraceable identity. He paid a vast sum to an English adoption broker who had ties to Hollywood, ensuring the child was adopted by a respectable couple, the McDowalls, and given an entirely fabricated British middle-class backstory. The use of a simple, non-ethnic name like Roddy McDowall was a deliberate choice to remove him completely from the Irish-American criminal associations of the O'Malley name. The greatest fear of Roddy's adoptive parents was a libel suit or a legal challenge by someone attempting to reclaim the fortune O'Malley had squirreled away. They raised Roddy in a state of hypervigilance, instilling in him a sense of refined politeness and absolute discretion. Roddy later recalled his mother instructing him, "Never, ever give too much away, darling." This innate secrecy contributed to his extraordinary talent for supporting roles, where he could observe and react without being the exposed center of attention. The secret deeply informed Roddy's personal life. He became obsessively private, keeping his true relationships and his inner thoughts guarded, a habit learned in childhood as a defense mechanism against a truth that could have ruined him. The legacy of Whiskey Bill followed him, though he never knew the full details of the bootlegging empire that paid for his passage to stardom. Instead of letting the darkness of his origin affect him, Roddy became known for his incredible kindness and loyalty to his friends, a quiet force of decency within the industry. He was the perpetual good sport, the reliable friend, and the supportive colleague, a man whose inherent goodness was perhaps his own defiant response to the illegality and avarice of his birth. His success was a triumph of manufactured identity over devastating lineage. The studio's insurance policy, the child used to leverage a mob boss. This next story moves from purchasing silence to purchasing power, where the child star was not just saved, but actively used as a strategic tool by the studio system. Dean Stockwell, the acclaimed child actor who transitioned seamlessly into a long and respected adult career, often played sensitive, introspective roles. Behind the scenes, however, his adoption by a connected Hollywood family was part of an intricate, terrifying plan by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to gain leverage over a rising mob associate. The associate, Angelo the Hammer Rizzoli, was quickly gaining control over film distribution and union activities in the 1940s. Rizzoli had a young son, Anthony, born out of a brief, tempestuous affair. Rizzoli's wife was notoriously volatile,
and the existence of an illegitimate son created a weakness Rizzoli could not tolerate. A ruthless MGM executive saw an opportunity. The studio arranged for Anthony's adoption by the Stockwells, a family with deep studio ties. Anthony was renamed Dean. The adoption was presented to Rizzoli not as a purchase, but as a service. The deal was simple. The studio gave the boy a life of fame and opportunity, providing Rizzoli with a clean, untraceable way to dispose of his liability. In return, the studio held the secret of Dean's true paternity. This secret was the insurance policy. If Rizzoli ever moved too aggressively against MGM's interests, the executive could leak the truth of Dean Stockwell's lineage to the newspapers. A truth that would not only ruin the star, but also shatter Rizzoli's carefully constructed family image and expose his vulnerability to his rivals. Dean Stockwell was for years the most valuable chip on the studio's poker table. Dean grew up feeling the weight of this invisible control. He described his childhood as profoundly restrictive, where every movement was monitored and every decision was made by the studio. This constant sense of being observed fueled his intense, guarded performances, giving him an uncanny ability to convey hidden turmoil. His quiet, almost melancholic screen presence was the result
of a child realizing he was not just an actor, but a bargaining tool. The knowledge that he was his birth father's insurance policy profoundly affected Dean Stockwell when he learned the truth years later. He felt exploited by both the mob and the studio. This revelation led to a period of intense artistic experimentation and retreat, as he struggled to reclaim an identity that was truly his own, untainted by the mob's intimidation or the studio's manipulation. His ability to survive and thrive in Hollywood for decades was a victory over the system that saw him as a mere pawn in a much larger, perilous game of control. His final, lasting legacy is one of resilience, built upon the foundation of a childhood secret that was worth far more than any movie contract. The Elegant Leading Lady and the Secret of the Havana Illegal Substance Runners. The criminal secrets were not always domestic. They often spanned international borders, adding a further layer of exotic danger to the star's origins. Eleanor Parker, known for her glamorous, sophisticated presence in films like Caged and The Sound of Music, was the epitome of refined beauty and poise. The truth lay far south, in the volatile, glamorous, and often dangerous pre-Castro world of Havana, Cuba. Eleanor was biologically the daughter of a key figure in the Havana illegal substance running operations of the 1940s. Her biological father, Miguel El Patron Diaz, was a major player in the movement of prohibited substances from South America through Cuba to the United States, operating in the high-stakes, violent world of international crime. When the political situation in Cuba began to turn unstable in the mid-1940s, Diaz realized his position was becoming untenable. He needed to find a safe way for his youngest child, Carmen, to escape the impending collapse and the very real threat of severe consequences from his rivals. Diaz arranged a desperate, high-risk trade, his daughter for a guaranteed safe passage out of Havana for several of his key lieutenants. A fixer with ties to Warner Brothers, who had business interests in Cuba, brokered the deal. Carmen was adopted by a studio family, renamed Eleanor, and given a new birthplace far from the Caribbean. The entire process was shrouded in secrecy, utilizing diplomatic and criminal channels to ensure the child's disappearance. The elegance that Eleanor Parker projected on screen was, in reality, a form of emotional armor. She grew up with an unexplained sense of displacement, always feeling foreign, an echo of the international chaos of her birth. Her perfect poise was her shield, a necessity learned to survive an atmosphere of deep-seated familial anxiety. When Eleanor learned the truth of her connection to the Havana underworld, she was profoundly shocked. She realized her life was not one of quiet dignity, but of dramatic escape, purchased by the desperation of a man trying to save himself and his organization. This knowledge gave a deeper, more complicated dimension to her later performances, particularly those where she played women in highly pressured, confined situations, such as in Caged. She understood the terror of being trapped and the need to maintain an elegant facade under the worst circumstances. Her greatest victory was in transforming that feeling of foreignness and danger into an international acting career. She embraced complex global roles, often traveling back to Europe and eventually to South America, as if subconsciously searching for the truth of her origins in the places her father had operated. Eleanor Parker's glamour was not superficial. It was the polished, resilient surface of a woman whose life had been bought and paid for in the shadows of the Havana underworld, a true survivor of international chaos. The famous dancer whose mother was forced to abandon her at the behest of Al Capone's lawyers. The ultimate shadow cast over Hollywood's golden dreams was the presence of Al Capone. His power was so vast that it extended even to dictating the fates of children who had nothing to do with him. Vera Ellen, the acclaimed dancer and actress known for her perfect, almost gravity-defying grace in musicals like White Christmas, was the image of light, airy innocence. The truth was far heavier, tracing back to the inner circle of the Chicago outfit. Vera Ellen's biological mother, Rose, was a performer who had a brief but consequential relationship with one of Capone's most trusted bookkeepers, Dominic "Dom" Rossi. When Rose became pregnant in 1921, Rossi was terrified. Capone's rule against any kind of domestic liability for his top men was absolute. Capone's organization was known for its ruthlessness and its demand for absolute control over its associates. Rossi and Rose were given an ultimatum by Capone's personal lawyers. The child must be permanently removed, and Rose must sign an agreement never to reveal Rossi's paternity. The child, Virginia, was effectively abandoned. The lawyers arranged for her adoption by a couple with absolutely no connections to Chicago or the entertainment industry. The family was paid a stipend, disguised as a trust fund, to ensure they would raise Virginia far away. Virginia was renamed Vera Ellen, a more exotic name befitting the star the studio hoped to create. The emotional toll on the birth mother, Rose, was immense. She was forced to choose between her child and her life. Vera Ellen's dancing, while technically perfect, often had a quality of almost desperate lightness, as if fleeing gravity itself. Biographers noted her intense insecurity and her lifelong struggle with emotional fragility, a trauma that stemmed from her deepest, earliest memory of being unwanted and forced into abandonment. The secret of her birth, that her existence was a direct complication that required the intervention of Al Capone's legal team, was a devastating truth she carried. When the truth finally came out decades later, it explained the source of her profound vulnerability. She realized her success was a life purchased by the power of the most infamous criminal organization in American history. However, her art became her redemption. She poured her pain into her performances, using her almost superhuman control over her body as a way to control the chaos of her origins. Vera Ellen's grace was the embodiment of a woman attempting to dance her way out of the shadow of the Chicago mob, transforming the trauma of abandonment into the transcendent beauty of movement. Please, if you find this journey through Hollywood's secret history as compelling as we do, click that like button right now and consider sharing this video with a friend. Your support helps us continue to shine a light on the full, complicated humanity of these Golden Age legends. The Golden Age juvenile whose identity was purchased from a corrupt political machine. The corruption that permeated Hollywood often mirrored the corruption of the political arena, creating a terrifying synergy of control. Scotty Beckett, the beloved child actor who appeared in The Jolson Story and countless other films, had a charming, mischievous screen presence that belied a desperately complicated background. His adoption was not engineered by the mob or a simple criminal, but by the highest levels of the Chicago political machine in the 1930s. Scotty's biological father was a powerful, highly corrupt city official whose mistress, a young woman named Helen, became pregnant. The official was married to a prominent socialite, and the political cost of the resulting scandal, particularly during a period of intense public scrutiny, would have ruined his career. His network of lawyers and fixers, who controlled everything from building contracts to police appointments, were deployed to eliminate the problem. They found a studio connection willing to take the child. The official paid a vast, untraceable sum, disguised as future consulting fees, to Paramount, to secure the adoption of his son James. James was renamed Scotty, and his official birth was moved to California. The key was that the official was paid not just with money, but with the guarantee that the studio would never, under any circumstances, allow Scotty to be questioned by the press about his adoptive parents' connections. The adoption was a shield for the political machine, removing a time bomb from their midst. Scotty Beckett's life as a star was marked by volatility. He struggled with personal issues throughout his adulthood, often feeling alienated from the system that raised him. This was perhaps a consequence of being a pawn in a brutal political game, a child whose entire existence was predicated on a lie designed to protect a corrupt official. He never truly learned the full scope of the political deals made over his head, but he carried the emotional weight of his manufactured identity. His tragic adult life, marred by instability and struggle, became the ultimate proof of the devastating toll that these secrets took. He was a symbol of the machine's power, bought and sold to secure political silence. Scotty's ultimate story is one of pure talent caught in a web of adult manipulation. A child whose entire life was a footnote in a Chicago election scandal. His mischievous smile on screen hid the profound, unhealed wound of a childhood purchased to protect a secret that should never have existed. The tragic story of the starlet who has returned to her crime family. While most of these stories end with the star escaping their criminal origins, this next chapter reveals the devastating failure of the system. The starlet who is deemed unadoptable and controversially returned to the remnants of her birth family. Kathy O'Donnell, known for her delicate beauty and The Best Years of Our Lives, was an actress who always seemed to project a quiet sadness. Her childhood began with the usual secrecy, but her story took a dark and unusual turn. Kathy's biological mother, Lorna, was the sister of a notorious Philadelphia numbers runner, Lucky Luciano, not the major mobster, but a local variation. When Lorna became pregnant in 1924, she feared the child would inherit the violence and the instability of the family. The studio, looking for a young actress, arranged her adoption through a small, private broker. The child, Anne, was renamed Kathy and placed with a respectable but highly demanding family. However, Kathy was a child of intense, volatile emotions, perhaps genetically inherited or simply the result of early life trauma. She struggled with discipline and exhibited behavioral issues that the studio-approved family was unwilling or unable to handle. The adoptive parents, terrified of damaging their reputation and frustrated by the lack of success in curbing her temper, went to the studio fixers. In a move almost unheard of, the studio invoked a clause that allowed for the return of the asset if the child proved unmanageable. In 1932, at the age of 8,
Kathy O'Donnell was devastatingly sent back. She was not returned to her biological mother, who had disappeared, but to a distant aunt who was still very much connected to the Numbers Runners family. Kathy spent her teenage years in an atmosphere of quiet menace and instability, constantly exposed to the criminal element her mother had tried to protect her from. She was finally rescued back into the Hollywood system as a young adult, found by a producer who saw her natural, complicated sorrow as perfect for the screen. Kathy O'Donnell's on-screen sadness was genuine. It was the product of a double abandonment, first by her birth mother, and second by her adoptive parents, and the studio that treated her like damaged goods. Her quiet presence in film was the result of a profound internal scar. Her story highlights the ultimate tragedy of
The system, that the very trauma the studio was trying to erase was exacerbated by its ruthless transactional nature. Her life became a powerful symbol of the human cost when a child is viewed not as a human being, but as a business asset. The icon who found her birth mother, a forgotten queen of the underworld. We end with a story of discovery and complex forgiveness, where the search for identity did not lead to a victim, but to a woman of formidable power. Deborah Paget, the exotic, glamorous leading lady of the 1950s, known for her roles in spectacles like The Ten Commandments, was a vision of controlled passion and mystery. The truth was far more dramatic and personally challenging. Deborah's biological mother, Violet the Duchess Thorne, was not a mistress or a victim, but a powerful, independent female figure in the 1935 New York underworld. The Duchess ran a highly lucrative, sophisticated operation involving illegal high-stakes gambling and smuggling, making her a wealthy and feared woman in her own right. She had her daughter, Diana, out of wedlock, and she realized that a child would create a vulnerability that her rivals could exploit. She made the choice to save her empire and her child by relinquishing the latter. The Duchess did not sell Diana. She placed her, paying a massive sum to a loyal family and a studio fixer, not for the child's disappearance, but for the child's future. The agreement guaranteed Diana a life of financial security and access to the arts. Diana was renamed Deborah Paget and raised with an almost royal bearing. The glamour that Paget exuded was the subtle echo of her true lineage, the child of an underworld queen. Deborah Paget spent her adult life searching for her origins, driven by a deep, unfulfilled curiosity. In the 1970s, she finally tracked down the Duchess, who was living in quiet, wealthy retirement abroad. The discovery was astonishing. Her birth mother was not the stereotype of a downtrodden criminal's mistress, but a woman of strength, intellect, and profound regret. The Duchess had chosen power over motherhood, a painful decision that had haunted her for decades. The reunion was complex. Deborah Paget found not shame, but a profound connection to a strong, independent woman who had defied the conventions of the time, albeit through illegal means. The closure was immense, allowing Deborah to finally reconcile the glamorous, powerful image she projected with the deep, mysterious force of her origins. She realized that her own drive and ambition were not manufactured by the studio, but inherited from her birth mother. This final story offers a unique form of redemption, a star who ultimately embraced the complex, dark strength of her lineage, transforming a secret into a powerful, complicated truth about identity and female power. These 15 stories represent just a fraction of the arrangements made in the backrooms of Hollywood and the criminal underworld. For every star who successfully erased their identity, countless others carried the quiet, agonizing burden of their origins. The price of fame was the total obliteration of the past.
a massive undertaking that required not only money, but the absolute cooperation of corrupt politicians, mob lawyers, and the ruthless efficiency of the studio fixers. When we look back at the golden age of Hollywood, we see a world of glittering premieres and carefully constructed illusions. But beneath that flawless surface was the constant, desperate activity of stars and studios alike, trying to outrun a past stained by prohibition, racketeering, political corruption, and violence. These child stars, the boy wonder, the little rascal, the wholesome ingenue, were the ultimate commodities, their childhoods sacrificed to protect the sanctity of the public image and the financial stability of the studios that owned them. They were adopted to secure silence, to provide leverage, and to erase the toxic lineage of America's most dangerous criminals. The human cost was immense. Many of these stars struggled with lifelong feelings of abandonment, identity confusion, and unexplained anxiety. Their on-screen performances, in many ways, were simply extensions of the performance they had been required to give in life. The perfect, wholesome child, utterly untainted by the dark realities of the world. Their art was the result of their greatest struggle, the need to transform tragedy into a marketable dream. Yet, knowing the truth does not diminish their brilliance. It elevates it. Their ultimate victory was their resilience. They took the trauma and the terror of their birthrights and channeled it into some of the most enduring, beloved performances in film history. They earned their fame by surviving the very system that created them. They shine all the brighter for having been revealed as complex, fragile, and utterly human. And so, we close the book, for now, on this dark and dazzling chapter of Hollywood's golden age. The curtain falls, but the secrets linger, echoing in the celluloid stillness. If the truth behind the twinkling lights of Tinseltown captivates you, if the complicated humanity of these iconic figures resonates, then do two things for us. First, join our company of discerning historians by subscribing to the channel. And second, show your appreciation for the truth by tapping the like button below. Your engagement, your comments, your theories, your curiosity is the very currency that allows us to continue digging for these forgotten histories. For every secret we unveil, there are 10 more waiting to be discovered. Don't let the past be forgotten. Subscribe and like so you don't miss the next revelation in this ongoing history of the shadows. Until then, keep watching the screen and keep looking deeper. Thank you for watching.